Good day and welcome. Today we're journeying back in time to the vast, sunburnt continent of Australia, a land with a history stretching back over 65,000 years. For millennia, this was the home of the world's oldest living cultures, a vibrant tapestry of hundreds of distinct First Nations peoples, each with their own language, customs, and deep spiritual connection to country. They were skilled hunters, gatherers, and custodians of the land, their lives intricately woven into the cycles of nature. This was a continent thriving with human life, long before it appeared on any European map. Imagine a world where every rock, river, and tree tells a story, a world governed by ancient laws and traditions. This was Australia before 1788, but on the other side of the globe, the British Empire was facing a crisis. The American Revolution had just ended, and Britain could no longer send its convicts to the American colonies. Its prisons were overflowing, a grim testament to the social upheaval of the Industrial Revolution. Poverty was rampant, and minor crimes often led to harsh sentences. The government desperately needed a new solution, a distant place to establish a penal colony. Their eyes turned to the Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, which had been charted by Captain James Cook just a couple of decades earlier. In May 1787, a fleet of 11 ships, known as the First Fleet, set sail from Portsmouth, England. It was an extraordinary and perilous undertaking. On board were over 1,400 people, including more than 750 convicts, men, women, and even children. Their crimes ranged from petty theft to more serious offenses. Alongside them were Marines, officers, and their families, all embarking on an 8-month voyage into the unknown. They faced cramped conditions, disease, and the immense psychological toll of leaving their world behind forever. Their destination was Botany Bay, a place described by Cook as promising, but which would soon prove to be anything but. Upon arriving at Botany Bay in January 1788, Captain Arthur Phillip, the fleet's commander, found it unsuitable for settlement. The soil was poor, and there was no reliable source of fresh water. Just days later, he scouted a nearby inlet that Cook had named Port Jackson. What he found there was, in his words, the finest harbor in the world. He chose a small cove with a freshwater stream and named it Sydney Cove, in honor of Lord Sydney, the British Home Secretary. On the 26th of January, 1788, the British flag was raised. This date, now celebrated as Australia Day, marks the formal beginning of British colonization. For the local Eora people, however, the arrival of these strange ships and their pale-skinned occupants marked the beginning of an invasion and a catastrophic disruption to their way of life. The early years of the Sydney Cove colony were a brutal struggle for survival. The settlers were unprepared for the Australian environment. They were farmers from a wet, temperate climate, now faced with a hot, dry land and unfamiliar soil. Crops failed, and supplies from England were unreliable and slow to arrive. Starvation was a constant threat. The relationship with the indigenous population was fraught with misunderstanding and conflict. The British concept of owning land was completely alien to the Eora, who saw themselves as custodians, not owners. As the colony expanded, it encroached on traditional hunting and gathering grounds, leading to competition for resources and inevitably to violence. Despite the hardships, the colony slowly grew. More convict fleets arrived, bringing not only forced labor but also essential skills. Free settlers, attracted by the promise of land and opportunity, began to trickle in. Explorers like Matthew Flinders, who was the first to circumnavigate the continent and popularize the name Australia, began to map its vast and intimidating interior. They pushed inland, crossing formidable mountain ranges and vast deserts, charting rivers and discovering lands that had, of course, been known to indigenous people for tens of thousands of years. These expeditions paved the way for further expansion and the establishment of new settlements across the continent. A major turning point in the colony's fortunes was the wool industry. In the early 1800s, pioneers like John MacArthur began experimenting with merino sheep, whose fine wool was highly prized in Britain. The wool boom transformed the colonial economy. It created immense wealth for a new class of pastoralists, or squatters, who claimed vast tracts of land for grazing. This rapid expansion, often illegal, dramatically accelerated the dispossession of Aboriginal peoples from their ancestral lands. The demand for land led to violent clashes on the frontier, a brutal and often hidden war that resulted in countless deaths and the destruction of traditional ways of life. By the mid-19th century, the Australian colonies were changing. The transportation of convicts to the eastern states ceased by 1853, and the population was increasingly made up of free immigrants. Then, in 1851, gold was discovered. The news spread like wildfire around the globe, triggering a massive gold rush. Hundreds of thousands of people from Britain, Ireland, Europe, China, and America flocked to the gold fields of Victoria and New South Wales. This influx of people trebled Australia's population in a decade, transforming its society and economy. Cities like Melbourne and Sydney boomed, becoming bustling metropolitan centers. The gold rush also fueled a growing sense of democratic spirit and a desire for self-governance among the colonists. The 6 separate British colonies on the Australian continent began to develop their own distinct identities, but they also shared a common heritage and faced common challenges. By the late 19th century, a movement towards federation began to gain momentum. Proponents argued that a unified nation would be stronger in terms of defense, trade, and immigration policy. After a series of conventions and referendums, the colonies agreed to unite. On the 1st of January 1901, the Commonwealth of Australia was born. A new constitution was enacted and a new nation was formed. However, this new nation was founded on policies of exclusion. The White Australia policy severely restricted non-European immigration, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were explicitly denied citizenship and the right to vote. The colonization of Australia is a story of 2 vastly different worlds colliding. For the British, it was a story of imperial ambition, survival against the odds, and the building of a new society. But for Australia's First Peoples, it was a story of invasion, dispossession, and devastating loss. The impact of colonization, the loss of land, language, culture, and life, is a profound trauma that continues to reverberate through Indigenous communities today. Understanding this dual history, with all its complexities and contradictions, is essential to understanding the Australia of the 21st century. It's a nation still grappling with its past as it seeks to forge a more inclusive and reconciled future. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through a pivotal and complex chapter of history. If you found this documentary insightful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that have shaped our world. We'll see you next time.